Welcome back to another Serial Killer Saturday. You know, I have read some disgusting things in this little journey we have taken together, and I thought it would get less gross, less disgusting, but it doesn't. Maybe that's because I try to put myself in the shoes of the victims, try to imagine the terror they felt, or the families having to hear the news, or worse, never having closure of knowing what happened or where their family members went. Robert William Pickton, aka Willie. He was convicted of killing only 6. He later confessed to 49, but the police believe the real number is closer to 144, or worse. There was later speculation whether one person could commit so many atrocities. And as we have learned here together, yes, one person can be a real monster who goes on killing undetected for years, even decades. In 1905, the great-grandfather of the serial killer bought land near a mental hospital. William Pickton raised hogs. His children grew up and raised hogs. His children's children grew up and raised hogs, all on the very same farm. Then in the late 1950s, the Picktons were forced to sell their farm and move. They had to make way for a new highway. In 1963, Willie's parents bought 40 acres of swamp for $18,000, towed their blue and white farmhouse to the site, and began raising children and pigs. They had 2 sons and a daughter. The daughter went off to boarding school in the city and never returned to the farm, while the boys remained. The boys' father died in 1978, and their mother followed in 1979. The boys, now in their late 20s, inherited the farm with their sister. In 1994, the Picktons struck it rich. Their farmland that was purchased for $18,000 in 1963 was now worth $300,000 in 1993. By 1994, it was valued at $7.2 million. In the fall of '94, they sold part of their farm for $1.7 million to a townhouse development company. That same year, the city also bought a chunk of their land for $1.2 million and turned it into a park. Then in '95, the school district bought a piece of the pig farm for $2.3 million and built an elementary school on the site. It was around this time when the Picktons became millionaires that the women began going missing in alarming numbers from the DES. In 1995, Catherine Gonzalez went missing. A few months later, Catherine Knight. Then Dorothy Spence, Diana Melnick, Tanya Holick, Olivia Williams, Frances Young, Stephanie Lane, Helen Hallmark, Janet Henry. The count didn't cease until 2001. According to Lincoln Clarks, a photographer who took pictures of 5 of the victims' remains, after making his small fortune, David Pickton left the family farm and moved a mile or less down the road to a new property, where he opened a party hall called Piggy's Palace in 1996. Robert Pickton now had the resources and the freedom to do as he pleased. A longshoreman who asked not to be named went with an old friend to a Halloween party at Piggy's Palace. He described the night in these hellish terms. I arrived at the party about 9 p.m. It was dark and rainy and muddy, and there were lots of motorcycles, old cars, and a big pig roasting on a spit. There were kids in costumes, some dressed as witches. These little kids were running around and playing in the dark. There wasn't much light. there were lots of women who looked like hookers. The party spilled all over the grounds, and there were people in the house and in the trailer doing the wild thing. I recall walking by a shack with a 40-watt bulb hanging over the door and machinery running inside. Here I got the death chill. The hairs on the back of my neck rose, and my feet froze to the ground. I didn't want to be there anymore, so I left and walked home. The account is by no means exceptional. Many who visited Piggy's Palace had similar impressions. It was wild. People were doing drugs and eating roasted pig. I was about to eat the pig, but when I saw Robert Pickton tearing apart the pig with his hands, I decided not to. His hands were dirty. Another unnamed woman said I went once, and I'd never go again. It was raunchy, lots of cocaine, lots of really, really badass people. I did not want to be a part of it. Piggy's Palace, however, had a double life. Records posted on CrimeLibrary.com show that Piggy's Palace was a non-profit society dedicated to raising money for sports organizations and other worthy groups, and as such, was visited by all kinds of people. 2 mayors, city council members, local business and civic leaders, ice hockey moms, high school and elementary school students. They all came for functions, dances, concerts, and other recreations at Piggy's Palace. Thousands of people had been to the palace and had enjoyed roasted pork. When questioned, they didn't want to believe that the pigs were the ones consuming the victims. It's common knowledge that Robert Pickton was, by the mid-90s, no longer a serious commercial pig farmer. He was a wealthy man. Raising hogs now was more of a hobby. He bought the pigs, fattened them, and sold the meat to friends, or roasted them for the bikers, prostitutes, mayors, and little leaguers who partied at Piggy's Palace. The entire city, population 53,000, it seemed, was feeding on the pigs that had been fed by the suspected serial killer, Robert Pickton. It wasn't just the guests of Piggy's Palace who consumed Pickton's pigs. The unusable remains of the pigs, entrails, brains, bones, nerve tissue, and gore, were taken by truck to a rendering plant near the DES called West Coast Reduction. Many are certain that the partial remains of the murdered sex workers were mixed within. The West Coast Reduction's facility is impressive. It's a complex of huge cylindrical cookers, storage tanks, office buildings, industrial stacks, and railroad tracks. Underground pipelines connect it with one of the biggest ports on the Pacific Rim. Huge orange cranes loom just behind it, and the surrounding air is relatively clean, although once in a while the smell of something awful wafts from an unidentifiable source. The plant turns animal bones, guts, fish, blood, pig entrails, used restaurant grease, and now, many believe, the remains of sex workers, into a number of consumer products, like lipstick base, soaps, shampoos, and perfumes. These commodities that improve human appearance are shipped all over the world. 6 blocks from the rendering plant, the most fashionable part of Vancouver begins. Commercial Drive is lined with restaurants that serve Cuban finger foods, theaters that screen Bollywood films, and stores that sell Italian shoes. People visit a wild variety of trendy cafes, tapas bars, spas, health food groceries, and cosmetic shops. All of these urban pleasures are walking distance from the rendering plant, the place where Pickton brought the intestines of his slaughtered hogs for more than 20 years. It is believed that Pickton would drive the intestines there, empty his truck, and then proceed to pick up sex workers, sometimes within a block of the plant. Vancouver residents have recently learned that fragments of some of these dead women's bodies may have entered the food chain through the rendering plant. As well as beauty products, rendering plants also make food for farm animals that humans consume. The regional director of the Canadian Food Inspection Agency said the following: "We made inquiries after learning that Robert Pickton had met the women he is accused of killing on his trips to the rendering plant. Any testing that would have been done at the plant would be around surveillance for chemical residues. I can't imagine any testing that would distinguish one animal matter from another." Pickton liked to hang out in the seediest hotels, the most notorious of which the Roosevelt and the Astoria Hotel. Robert Pickton's girlfriend, who for 18 months lived on the death farm. She is reported to be a junkie, half sensible, and now infamous for having arranged fatal farm visits for several women who were staying at the Roosevelt Hotel. One of whom was Andrea Josbury, who lived in room 201 and disappeared in June of 2001, whose remains were found on the farm the following year. The Astoria bartender, when asked about Pickton, said, "That faker, he used to sit right over there," the bartender said, pointing to an empty table. "He sat there all the time by himself. He was a wannabe, you know, he wanted to be a biker, a Hell's Angel, a mean leather guy. But everyone knew he was a weasel, a wannabe." The bartender claims he wasn't surprised when he heard Pickton was a serial killer. He said, "I can't imagine hanging out with a guy like that without something bad happening." Across the street from the pig farm is a makeshift memorial next to the Costco. In front of a white tent, there is an odd garden of old and new flowers, snapshots and news photos, short poems, and what appear to be personal items like teddy bears, left by friends and relatives of the murdered women. The police and scientists still occupy the farm, still searching for remains, still exit its gates to visit the Starbucks at the mall. Eventually, the investigation will end, the police tape will come down, and the scientists will depart. What will happen to Canada's most notorious pig farm then? It has been suggested that they build a real memorial park out of respect, and hopefully they will. In the meantime, the world goes on, using products that may or may not contain the remains of victims of Canada's most notorious serial killer. As this video comes to a close, in the credits, you will see a list of the known victims of Pickton, and it is literally the least I could do. If you have a serial killer you would like to see featured here, please email me at DuchessDark676@gmail.com. See you next time.